It weighs 14 pounds. It is roughly the size of a softball. Its surface is smooth, silver gray, and it is warm to the touch, not from any external source, but from itself, from the slow, steady decay of its own atoms. It sits on a laboratory bench in New Mexico under August light, looking like nothing in particular. A decorative object, a paperweight, a trinket. It is made of plutonium. And it had a target. It had a delivery date. It had a crew assigned to carry it, a bomber waiting on a Pacific island, and a city, or several cities, whose fate depended on whether it arrived on time. The delivery date was August 19th, 1945, 10 days after the bombing of Nagasaki. This bomb was never dropped. Almost no one knows it existed. And the question of what stopped it, what stood between this 14-pound sphere and a Japanese city, is a story that begins not with a decision, but with a factory. By the summer of 1945, the Manhattan Project was no longer an experiment. It was an industry. The Hanford B reactor in Washington State had been completed in September 1944, 11 months after construction began on a remote stretch of high desert that workers reached by bus and were not permitted to describe to their families. 2,000 aluminum tubes stretched back 40 feet into the reactor face, each threaded with slugs of natural uranium. The uranium absorbed neutrons. The neutrons transformed the uranium into plutonium. The plutonium was extracted, refined, and shipped south to Los Alamos in New Mexico, where it was machined into bomb cores. Workers at Hanford were told only that their labor would help end the war. By war's end, half the chemists and metallurgists working directly with the material had to be pulled from duty when, unacceptably, high levels of plutonium were found in their urine. The pipeline produced nearly 3.5 bombs per month. By July 1945, the United States had enough fissile material for 3 complete weapons: the Trinity test device, the Little Boy uranium bomb, and the Fat Man plutonium bomb. Design refinements already under consideration would allow that rate to climb. General Leslie Groves, director of the Manhattan Project, expected a 3rd Fat Man ready for August 19th, 3 more in September, 3 in October. If Japan held out past autumn, the United States would have dropped, conservatively, 8 atomic bombs on the country. The standing order made this explicit. On July 25th, Lieutenant General Thomas Handy had sent a directive to General Carl Spaatz, commander of the U.S. Strategic Air Forces in the Pacific. The order authorized the 20th Air Force to deliver its first special bomb after approximately August 3rd on one of 4 cities: Hiroshima, Kokura, Niigata, or Nagasaki. Additional bombs would be delivered on the above targets as soon as made ready by the project staff. New targets would be chosen once the first 4 were eliminated. This was not an order to drop 1 bomb. It was an order to drop every bomb that became available on a rolling basis until further notice. No further presidential authorization required. The pipeline would run on its own authority. Groves had designed it this way. Major General Leslie Richard Groves, a large, heavy-set man in Army khakis, 2 stars on his shoulders, running the most expensive and most secret scientific program in human history, with the composure of someone managing a freight schedule. His colleagues described him as loud, bossy, imperious, incapable of self-doubt. He had overseen the construction of the Pentagon, completed in under 18 months. He had driven the Manhattan Project from concept to detonation in 3 years. He had never, in his professional life, built something that didn't get used. His logic was impeccable, given what he knew. Japan had absorbed an incendiary campaign of almost incomprehensible scale since March 1945. The firebombing of Tokyo on the night of March 9th, Operation Meeting House, killed an estimated 100,000 people and destroyed 267,000 buildings in a single night, incinerating 41 square kilometers of the city. By July, more than 60 Japanese cities had been bombed in the same fashion, with no appreciable change in Japan's stance on surrender. The B-29 crews who flew these missions came back, not exulting. They were sick with what they'd done. They wanted to live. They wanted it to end. But the bombing continued, and Japan continued to fight, and American planners drew the rational conclusion it would take something worse than fire. Groves was building that something worse, and on the morning of August 6th, it arrived. It is 8:15 in the morning. The Enola Gay, a B-29 superfortress of the 509th Composite Group, releases the Little Boy uranium bomb over Hiroshima. The bomb kills an estimated 70,000 to 80,000 people instantly. Tens of thousands more will die in the weeks that follow. Harry Truman is aboard the USS Augusta, returning from the Potsdam Conference. He receives the news in the ship's mess with sailors around him and calls it the greatest thing in history. He issues a public statement warning Japan that if they do not surrender immediately, they can expect a rain of ruin from the air, the like of which has never been seen on this earth. In Tokyo, Japan's Supreme War Council, the Big Six, receives word of Hiroshima and does not surrender. The senior leadership of the Imperial Japanese Army, led by War Minister General Korechika Anami, grossly underestimates the scale of what has happened. They begin preparing to impose martial law to stop anyone who might attempt to make peace. 3 of the 6, Foreign Minister Togo, Prime Minister Suzuki, Navy Minister Yonai, believe Japan must accept the Allied demands. The other 3, Anami, Army Chief of Staff Umezu, Navy Chief of Staff Toyoda, will not discuss it. The weapon designed to shock Japan into surrender is being processed by Japan's military as a manageable catastrophe. They are wrong about what it is, and Truman is wrong about how they will respond. 2 days later, on the night of August 8th, the Soviet Union declares war on Japan and invades Manchuria. For Japan's leadership, this is not merely a military disaster. For months, while publicly pledging to fight to the last man, the Big Six had been quietly asking Moscow to mediate a negotiated peace. Terms more favorable than unconditional surrender, terms that might preserve the imperial institution. The Soviets had been playing both sides. That option dies overnight. The next morning, August 9th, Japan's Big Six are meeting to discuss the Soviet invasion when a messenger enters the room. A second atomic bomb has just detonated over Nagasaki. The timing is surreal. Calamity arriving in the middle of a meeting about the previous calamity. The council deadlocks 3-3. The war faction will settle for nothing less than a negotiated armistice. Failing that, they are prepared to die in the defense of the home islands. That night, just before midnight, an imperial conference convenes in the bunker beneath the palace. The Big Six, Baron Hiranuma of the Privy Council, and Emperor Hirohito himself gather in the low-ceilinged underground room. Hours of debate resolve nothing. Prime Minister Suzuki then does something without precedent in Japan's modern history. He asks the emperor to decide. Hirohito speaks softly. He does not believe his nation can continue to fight. He states that the time has come when we must bear the unbearable. He gives his sanction to accept the Allied proclamation. The surrender offer is drafted before dawn. It carries one condition: the imperial institution must be preserved. Tokyo's foreign ministry transmits it to the Swiss legation in Washington before the sun rises on August 10th. 2 governments are now in motion. One toward surrender, one toward a third atomic bomb. Neither knows what the other is doing. On the morning of August 10th, General Groves sits at his desk in Washington and begins to write. The memorandum he addresses to Army Chief of Staff George Marshall is a production document. Precise, bureaucratic, free of drama. Groves reports that a third bomb, an implosion device of the Fat Man design, plutonium-239 core, will be ready for shipment on August 12th or 13th, ahead of the original August 24th schedule. At Los Alamos, technicians have worked 24 hours straight to cast the plutonium core. It still needs pressing and coating. That will take until August 16th. The bomb should be ready for use on the first suitable weather after August 17th or 18th. The core itself is a sphere of plutonium-gallium alloy, 89 millimeters in diameter, roughly the size of a softball. Its surface is silver gray. It is slightly warm to the touch from its own decay. At almost the same hour, Japan's conditional surrender offer arrives in Washington. James Burns, the Secretary of State, reads it. Henry Stimson, the Secretary of War, reads it. Truman reads it. The condition, that the Emperor's prerogatives as sovereign ruler be preserved, is unacceptable to all three. Burns drafts the American reply. The Emperor will be subject to the authority of the Supreme Allied Commander. No guarantee can be given for the imperial institution. In Anami's circle in Tokyo, this is read as a demand for the Emperor's humiliation. The faction that was barely persuadable has found, in the American reply, the argument it needed. Groves's memorandum reaches Marshall's desk. Marshall reads it. He takes a pen and writes directly on the document, in his own hand, 8 words. It is not to be released over Japan without express authority from the President. His signature below it. G. Marshall. The date, 8/10/45. It is not a dramatic gesture. It is a bureaucratic one. A handwritten line on a piece of paper placing the most powerful weapon ever built back under constitutional authority. Without it, the July 25th Standing Order remains operative. Bombs arrive at Tinian, bombers take off, cities burn, and no one with the authority to say otherwise has been asked. Marshall draws a line. It is not enough to stop the bomb, but it moves the decision to the only place it constitutionally belongs. Truman now controls the trigger. The question is whether the intelligence reaching him will tell him the truth about what is happening in Tokyo. It will not. What follows is 5 days of parallel motion. Truman halts conventional bombing on August 11th, a gesture toward the Japanese signal. He is waiting for unconditional capitulation. The silence from Tokyo stretches. From the American side of the Pacific, that silence looks like one thing. From inside the Japanese cabinet, it is something else entirely. The Big Six remain deadlocked. Anami's faction, fortified by the American reply, argues that the surrender terms threaten the Emperor's existence, the very thing Japan sought to preserve. Younger officers around the war minister are meeting in private, sketching something on paper. Anami listens. He does not tell them to stop. He does not endorse them. He listens and says nothing that would end it. The silence stretches from August 11th to August 12th, then to August 13th. On August 13th, 1945, 2 senior military officers have a phone conversation. The call is recorded. Decades later, it is declassified. They discuss the schedule for atomic strikes on Japan with the matter-of-factness of men reviewing a production calendar, tonnages, dates, weather windows. At one point, one of the generals remarks, almost in passing, "If we had another one ready, today would be a good day to drop it. We don't, but anyhow, within the next 10 days, the Japanese will make up their minds." The word "it" refers to an atomic bomb. The men do not linger on this. They move on to scheduling. Also on August 13th, Groves cannot reach Marshall or Stimson. He makes a decision on his own authority. The plutonium core is not to be shipped from Los Alamos. He will later learn that Marshall was grateful for the initiative. But the rest of the bomb's components are already moving westward. The third bomb has reached as far as a Naval Air Station Moffett Field in Sunnyvale, California, enormous hangars built for Navy dirigibles, now holding components of the most destructive weapon on Earth, with the Bay Area fog rolling in at dusk. The assembly waits for a core that is still being finished in New Mexico. In Tokyo, what the Americans are reading as defiance is a government at war with itself. The emperor has spoken, but his order has produced not obedience but constitutional paralysis. Officers who have served the emperor their entire lives are now planning to act against his expressed will in the name of protecting him. They have convinced themselves that the emperor is being deceived by cowards, that the real Hirohito would want them to fight. They are meeting in the corridors of the War Ministry, and the arguments run into the night. On August 14th, with still no unconditional surrender from Tokyo, Truman resumes the conventional bombing campaign. 700 B-29s, the largest single bombing raid of the entire Pacific War. That afternoon, he meets with the British ambassador. He remarks, gravely, that since the Japanese seem unwilling to surrender unconditionally, he now has no alternative but to order an atomic bomb dropped on Tokyo. If the order is given, the operation will take place within days. At that same hour, in the bunker beneath the Imperial Palace, with the engines of 700 B-29s audible through the walls overhead, Hirohito convenes a second Imperial conference. He speaks again to the same men in the same room. He finds the Allied reply acceptable. The surrender will proceed. He has decided, and he will not be moved, and there can be no more debate. Truman is preparing to incinerate a city that is already surrendering. He does not know this. Major Kenji Hatanaka is 33 years old. He is a junior officer of the Imperial Japanese Army, a man of total conviction and almost no authority, who has spent 3 days attempting to persuade his superiors to join him in preventing what he considers a national dishonor. None of them will commit. It does not stop him. Just past 9:30 on the night of August 14th, Hatanaka and approximately 1,000 soldiers move on the Imperial Palace. They occupy key areas. They cut the telephone lines. They find Lieutenant General Takeshi Mori, commander of the Imperial Guard Division, and shoot him. Using his stolen seal, they forge orders in his name, sealing the palace and locking the gates. From the conspirators' perspective, the coup is running on schedule. Their objective is not the emperor himself. Their objective is a recording. 2 12-inch phonograph discs made earlier that evening, in which Hirohito's voice announces Japan's surrender. These discs, if they reach NHK radio and are broadcast to the Japanese people at noon, will make the surrender irreversible. The emperor's voice is the only mechanism powerful enough to override the military culture that would otherwise fight to the last man on every beach and in every town in Japan. Destroy the recordings, and the surrender dies with them. The war continues. Find them. Find them tonight. The palace is large, and the soldiers are moving through it in the dark. The recordings are not where the conspirators expect. They are hidden in a small office safe used by a member of the Empress's household retinue. The soldiers search and find nothing. Somewhere in the palace's inner rooms, in the hours before dawn, the discs are wrapped and moved. One is placed in a lacquer box. The other is folded into a lunch bag, the kind a chamberlain might carry on any ordinary working day, and walked out of the rooms where soldiers are still searching. The fate of the Pacific War moves through a darkened palace in a lunch bag, while B-29 engines drone overhead. Hatanaka cannot rally the support he needs. General Shizuichi Tanaka's Eastern District Army, which commands enough force to decide the matter, refuses to endorse the plot and surrounds the palace. Without the senior military behind it, the coup has no path forward. One by one, through the hours before dawn, the coup unravels. The recordings are intact. The palace is being stood down. War Minister Anami does not live to see what he helped cause or failed to prevent. He dies by his own hand before dawn, leaving behind a death poem. He had not joined the coup. Yes, he had not stopped it. Just before noon on August 15, 1945, Major Kenji Hatanaka places a pistol to his forehead and shoots himself with a death poem in his pocket. In a street in Tokyo, At noon precisely, an NHK radio announcer instructs the nation to stand for an announcement of the highest importance. The national anthem plays. Then a voice, thin, formal, in a register of classical Japanese that most listeners have never heard and cannot fully parse, fills homes and shops and military garrisons across Japan and across the breadth of its empire. It is the first time the Japanese people have ever heard their emperor speak. Many of those listening cannot understand the formal language. An announcer follows, speaking plainly, and explains to a stunned nation what they have just heard. At Los Alamos and at Kirtland Field, someone picks up a telephone. The plutonium core is not to be shipped. The war did not end cleanly on August 15th. American planners were not certain the surrender would hold. A militarist coup remained a genuine possibility in the days that followed, and preparations for the third atomic strike continued until September 2nd, the day the formal surrender was signed aboard the USS Missouri in Tokyo Bay. The bomb stayed on standby while diplomats arranged a ceremony. This fact is almost entirely absent from the popular history of the war. In the months that followed, a new story was constructed. Memoirs appeared, written by men who had been inside the program, asserting that it was always understood 2 bombs would suffice, that the production pipeline had never truly been running, that no one seriously intended a third strike. Groves and Robert Oppenheimer were brought to the Trinity test site in New Mexico with a group of reporters to demonstrate, officially and firmly, that there was no residual radiation, that any reports filtering out of Japan suggesting otherwise were fabrications. The 2 bombs had ended the war. This was the story. It was assembled after the fact by the people who had run the program, and it held for decades. Groves himself did not hold much longer. In the restructured post-war military, General Eisenhower gave him a dressing down and told him he would never be appointed Chief of Engineers, the posting Groves had spent his career pursuing. 3 days later, Groves announced his intention to leave the army. The man who had built the most consequential weapon in human history, who had driven the entire enterprise from laboratory to battlefield in 3 years, was quietly shown the door. He went on to become a vice president at Sperry Rand. He wore civilian clothes and attended board meetings and did not discuss plutonium. The core that he had ordered cast, that his technicians had worked 24 hours straight to produce, that had traveled as far as California before the telephone call that stopped it, remained in New Mexico. 6 days after Hirohito's broadcast, on the evening of August 21st, 1945, Harry Daghlian was alone in a Los Alamos laboratory with the sphere. He was 24 years old, a physicist, one of the people who had built the thing the war was fought with. He was performing a criticality experiment, stacking tungsten carbide bricks around the core, measuring how close he could bring the assembly to a sustained chain reaction. He was working alone. He was working late. He dropped a brick. It fell directly onto the core. The core went supercritical. A blue glow filled the room. Daghlian knocked the brick away with his bare hands, interrupting the reaction, absorbing in those seconds a dose of radiation his body could not survive. He died 25 days later in the hospital at Los Alamos. 9 months after that, on May 21st, 1946, a physicist named Louis Slotin was performing the same category of experiment with the same core. He was holding 2 beryllium-coated hemispherical shells apart with a flathead screwdriver, controlling the distance between them, keeping the assembly just below the threshold. The screwdriver slipped. The shells came together. A blue glow filled the room again. Slotin threw the shells apart with his bare hands. He died 9 days later. After the second death, Los Alamos gave the core its final name. Not the third shot. Not Rufus, the Demon Core. All criticality experiments at the laboratory were suspended. Officials had planned to use the core in the post-war nuclear tests at Bikini Atoll in 1946. the Operation Crossroads tests, designed to measure the effects of atomic weapons on naval vessels. By the time those tests ran, the core was too radioactive for use. It was melted down and dissolved quietly into the expanding American nuclear arsenal, its plutonium scattered among the stockpile of weapons that would define the next 50 years. The plutonium core manufactured to destroy a Japanese city killed 2 people. Both of them were American. Both of them were in New Mexico. The city it was meant for is still there. The sphere on the laboratory bench, smooth, silver-gray, warm to the touch from its own slow decay, looking like nothing.